In the high vaulted chambers of the verdant spire, the royal palace of the Xylos dominion, carved from living crystal that hummed with ancient energy, an alien queen named Zyra sat upon her throne of petrified starlight. Her skin, the deep emerald of storm-lashed forests, shimmered faintly under the twin suns' filtered glow, and her long white hair cascaded like frozen rivers over her shoulders, braided with threads of bioluminescent moss. Once, she had ruled with unshakable resolve, her name whispered in dread across 100 star systems. But time, that slow devourer of even the mightiest, had begun to gnaw at the edges of her certainty. Her only daughter, Princess Vela, stood before her now, head bowed, her own green skin dull with the weight of shame, her white hair unbound and trailing to the floor like surrender flags. Vela was barren, a fact confirmed through the sacred rites of the hearthstone chamber, where no Xylosian womb had ever failed to glow with the promise of life, until hers. The Xylosian royal line had always been defined by its fertility, each generation stronger, wiser, more radiant than the last. A barren heir was not merely a disappointment, it was an omen. Whispers had already begun in the lower corridors of the spire, murmurs that the gods had turned their faces from Zyra's bloodline. Desperation, cloaked in regal silk and perfumed with the scent of solar lilies, had driven Zyra to a decision so radical it risked shattering centuries of tradition. She would wed her daughter to a human. Humans, those chaotic, warm-blooded creatures from the blue sphere, were regarded by most Xylosians as little more than clever animals. They wept openly, laughed without rhythm, and aged like fallen leaves. But they bred like wildfire, and their resilience in the face of extinction-level events was, frankly, impressive. Zyra had watched them from afar for decades, even rescued a few from dying starships, studied their strange biology. And so, in a ceremony witnessed only by the palace's silent stone guardians and sealed with the blood oath of both species, Vela was given to a human soldier named Torin. Torin was no prince. He had been found half dead in the wreckage of a crashed reconnaissance vessel on the ice plains of Xylos's outer moon. His skin frostbitten, his breath shallow. Yet he had looked up at Zyra with eyes so steady and calm that she'd nearly mistaken him for one of her own. She'd nursed him back to health not out of kindness but curiosity, and now that curiosity had become strategy. The wedding was swift, unsentimental, and utterly alien to human custom. No rings, no vows beyond the binding chant of the Sky Elders. Just two beings, one trembling with hope, the other numb with resignation, clasped together beneath the shifting auroras of a foreign sky. Years passed. Torin and Vela were given a quiet estate in the northern reaches of the spire's foothills, nestled among whispering pines and snow-draped cliffs. At first, their union was strained. Two languages, two souls, two ways of seeing the world colliding like comets. But Torin, ever patient, began to learn the subtle art of Xylosian silence. The way a pause could speak volumes, how a tilt of the head could convey sorrow. Vela, in turn, discovered that human laughter could thaw even the iciest grief. She watched him build shelters with his bare hands, cook strange stews from alien fungi, and dance alone under the twin moons when he thought no one was watching. Slowly, a bond grew. Not the grand, operatic love of epic tales, but something quieter, sturdier. Companionship forged in snow and starlight. And then, against every law of Xylosian biology, Vela's womb began to glow. It started as a faint pulse beneath her navel, so weak she thought it was a trick of the light. But the hearthstone chamber confirmed it. Life stirred within her. Not one life, but two. Twins. The news sent shockwaves through the spire. Zyra, who had long since stopped watching the northern estate, ordered immediate surveillance. She watched through crystalline scrying orbs as Vela swelled with child, as Torin knelt beside her each night to hum human lullabies, as snow fell softly on their cabin like a blessing. When the twins were born, wrapped in cloaks of woven aurora thread, their cries echoed through the mountain valleys like music. They were unlike anything the Xylosians had ever seen. Their skin held a pale green undertone, kissed with the faintest gold of their father's heritage. Their hair was white as fresh snow, but streaked with strands of warm brown. Their eyes, one twin had irises like molten amber, the other like deep forest pools, held both human emotion and Xylosian stillness. They giggled, they cooed, they reached for the stars through the frosted windows of their nursery. Zyra watched them grow from afar, her heart a battlefield of pride and fear. These children, they were not pure. They were something new, and in a society built on purity, newness was dangerous. For 12 cycles of the twin suns, Zyra let them be. She told herself it was mercy. In truth, it was cowardice. She could not bear to see what her own decree had wrought, nor could she bring herself to destroy it. But the whispers in the spire grew louder. The High Council of Elders demanded answers. Are they Zylosian? They asked. Or are they human? The question was a blade. And so, with a heart colder than the ice fields of her youth, Zyra summoned her daughter, her son-in-law, and her grandchildren to the verdant spire for judgment. The day of their arrival, snow fell thick and silent over the palace. Torin led the way, his human frame broad and steady beneath a thick fur-lined coat stitched with Zylosian runes for protection. Vela followed, her white hair now braided with threads of gold, a mark of motherhood, and her posture straighter than it had ever been. Between them walked the twins, Lyric and Mela, 12 years old and brimming with restless energy. Lyric, the boy, had his father's stubborn chin and his mother's quiet intensity. Mela, the girl, was all mischief and spark, her laughter ringing like wind chimes even in the solemn corridors of the palace. Zyra stood on the dais of the grand audience hall, flanked by the stone-faced elders and bathed in the cold light of the throne room's floating orbs. She had rehearsed her speech 1,000 times. Measured, regal, final. She would declare the children unfit to inherit, sever the union, and offer Vela a quiet retirement in the Temple of Forgotten Stars. But the moment she looked into Mela's eyes that held both the fire of a human child and the ancient calm of her Zylosian ancestors, Zyra froze. Not metaphorically, literally. A wave of energy, raw and primal, surged from the throne itself, locking her muscles in place. Her breath caught, her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. For the first time in centuries, Queen Zyra felt fear. Not of rebellion, not of war, but of wonder. Because as Mela stepped forward, unafraid, and reached out a small hand toward the throne, the petrified starlight beneath Zyra's feet began to glow, the same soft pulse that had once emanated from Vela's womb. The elders gasped. Torin tensed, ready to shield his children. Vela's eyes widened in recognition, and Zyra, proud, unyielding Zyra, felt tears gather at the corners of her eyes, hot and alien on her green skin. For the throne of the Zylos Dominion was not merely a seat of power. It was a living artifact, fused with the genetic memory of every ruler who had sat upon it. And it had just recognized the twins, not as half-breeds, not as abominations, but as heirs. Before anyone could speak, before Zyra could regain control of her limbs, the palace alarms shrieked to life. Crimson light flooded the hall. The crystalline walls trembled. From the outer gates came the thunder of war engines and the sharp crackle of plasma fire. The Kethie, a rival species long thought extinct, had returned. They came not with diplomacy, but with annihilation. Their obsidian ships tore through the upper atmosphere like black daggers, unleashing firestorms upon the spire's lower districts. Their warriors, armored in biomechanical shells and wielding sonic lances that shattered bone with a single note, poured through the gates like a tide of shadow. Chaos erupted. The elders scrambled for cover. Palace guards, green-skinned warriors with white helms and glowing staves, rushed to form a defensive line. Torin, without hesitation, shoved Lyric and Mela behind Vela and turned to face the breach. His human body no match for alien weaponry, yet his stance unbroken. "Stay behind me," he growled, though he held no weapon. But Mela darted forward, her small hand now pressed flat against the throne. The glow intensified, spreading up the armrests, up Zyra's legs, until it surrounded her like a cocoon of light. With a shuddering gasp, Zyra regained movement, but she did not rise in anger. She rose in awe. "Mela, Lyric," she whispered, her voice cracking like ancient ice. "You are awakened." The children, it seemed, had inherited more than just hybrid features. They carried within them the dormant resonance of the Zylosian royal bloodline, a power so rare it had not surfaced in generations. The throne had recognized them not just as heirs, but as catalysts. Lyric, wide-eyed but resolute, stepped to his sister's side. As if guided by instinct, he placed his palm against the opposite arm of the throne. The light flared, then erupted outward in a pulse that shook the very foundations of the spire. Outside, the Kethie war machines stuttered and collapsed, their engines shorting out. The invading warriors clutched their heads in agony as the pulse disrupted their neural implants. Inside the hall, silence fell, broken only by the labored breathing of those present. Zyra descended from the throne, her emerald skin aglow with reflected light. She knelt before her grandchildren, something she had not done for anyone in 500 years. "You saved us," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Mela grinned, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "We didn't even know what we were doing." Torin let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding and ruffled his son's hair. Vela stepped forward and wrapped her arms around all three of them. Her mother, her children, her husband, forming a circle that defied species, tradition, and time. But the Kethie were not so easily defeated. From the upper balconies, a single cloaked figure emerged, taller than the rest, its armor pulsing with violet veins of energy. It raised a weapon unlike any other, a heart piercer, forged from the core of a dead star and designed to sever soul from body. "You think hybrid blood can protect you?" the Kethie commander hissed, its voice like grinding stone. "The Xylos line ends today." Before anyone could react, the figure leapt from the balcony, weapon aimed straight at Mela's heart. Torin moved faster than thought. He threw himself in front of his daughter, human flesh against alien steel. The heart piercer struck his chest. Time seemed to stop. Mela screamed. Lyric lunged. Vela's cry echoed through the hall like a war song. And Zyra did something no one expected. She threw her arms wide and unleashed the full power of the royal resonance. Not as a weapon, but as a shield. A dome of emerald energy bloomed from her, enveloping Torin just as the heart piercer's tip pierced his skin. The weapon shrieked, its energy backfiring, and exploded in the Kethie commander's hand. Torin collapsed, blood seeping through his coat. But he was alive. Barely. Lyric and Mela rushed to his side, their hands glowing now with the same soft light as the throne. Without instruction, without hesitation, they pressed their palms to his wound. The light flowed into him, knitting flesh, mending bone, purging poison. It was clumsy, imperfect, but it worked. Torin's eyes fluttered open, and he managed a weak smile. "You two are grounded," he whispered. Mela laughed through her tears. "Only if you promise not to jump in front of alien spears again." Above them, the Kethie commander writhed in pain, its armor cracking. The remaining invaders, leaderless and stunned by the display of power, began to retreat. But Zyra knew this was only the beginning. The Kethie would not abandon their vendetta. And now they knew about the twins. Later that night, as healers tended to the wounded and snow continued to fall over the scarred but standing spire, the royal family gathered in a private chamber warmed by geothermal vents. Torin lay on a soft pallet, wrapped in healing moss and sipping bitter tea brewed from mountain roots. Vela held his hand, her expression a mixture of relief and lingering fear. Zyra stood by the window watching the stars. For the first time in centuries, she felt small. Not weak, small. The universe was vaster, stranger, and more beautiful than she had allowed herself to believe. "I was wrong," she said at last, not turning around. Vela looked up. "About what?" "About purity," Zyra said, her voice quiet but firm. "I thought strength came from sameness, from control. But look at you. Look at them." She gestured to the twins, who were now playfully trying to see whose glow was brighter. "You are not half of anything. You are whole. More than whole." Torin chuckled weakly. "Does this mean I get to keep my room in the palace?" Zyra turned, a rare smile touching her lips. "You are family, Torin of the Blue Sphere, and the verdant spire has always had room for those who protect its heart." In the days that followed, the spire transformed. Old laws were questioned. Traditions were examined, not discarded but reshaped. The twins began formal training, not just in Xylosian lore, but in human history, in diplomacy, in the art of bridging worlds. Lyric showed a talent for engineering, designing shields that combined human tech with Xylosian resonance. Mela, ever curious, began translating human poetry into the harmonic tongue of her people, her voice filling the halls with songs no Xylosian had ever heard. Yet danger loomed. The Kethie had retreated, but their spies remained. Rumors spread of a secret weapon being forged in the dark sectors, a null stone capable of silencing the royal resonance forever. And whispers reached Zyra of a faction within her own court who believed the twins were abominations, that their powers were unnatural, that Torin's presence was a corruption. One evening, as the twins practiced their resonance beneath the auroras, Vela found her mother on the highest balcony of the spire. "They're getting stronger," Vela said softly. "They must," Zyra replied. "The storm is coming. Will you stand with us?" Vela asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Zyra looked at her daughter, the child she had once deemed broken, and saw not failure, but the future. "I failed you once," she said. "I will not fail your children." Below them, Lyric and Mela clasped hands and sent a pulse of light skyward, where it danced among the stars like a promise. Torin joined them moments later, his steps still slow but steady. He stood between his wife and queen, a human bridge between two worlds. "We'll teach them," he said. "Not just how to fight, but how to choose kindness even when it's hard. How to lead without fear." Zyra nodded. For the first time in a long time, she felt not just hope, but joy. And somewhere in the shadows of the spire, a traitor watched and waited. But that was a story for another night. For now, in the snow-dusted heart of the verdant spire, a family, human, Xylosian, and something wonderfully in between, stood together beneath the twin suns, ready to face whatever came next. Weeks bled into months, and the verdant spire settled into a fragile peace. The twins, Lyric and Mela, trained daily under the watchful eyes of Zyra, Vela, and even Torin, whose human intuition often spotted gaps in traditional Xylosian defense methods. He taught them to improvise, to turn a snowdrift into cover, to use silence as a weapon, to read the tension in an enemy's shoulders before their weapon even twitched. In return, the children taught him the subtle hum of the palace crystals, how to sense shifts in atmospheric charge, how to listen not just with ears but with the marrow of his bones. He was no longer an outsider. He was Torin of the Verdant Spire, a title whispered with growing respect. Yet peace, Zyra knew, was never more than the breath between storms. The first twist came not from without, but from within. One evening, as the family shared a meal of roasted moon fungus and steaming root broth in the sunken hearth chamber, a high-pitched chime echoed through the palace walls, the signal of royal emergency. Moments later, a young acolyte burst in, trembling. "Your Majesty, the hearthstone chamber, it's gone dark." Zyra rose instantly, her white hair catching the firelight like spun frost. The hearthstone was the core of Xylosian spiritual life, a massive, ever-glowing crystal that pulsed in time with the planet's biosphere. Its light had never dimmed, not even during the great collapse of the Third Spiral Wars. If it was dark, something was deeply, catastrophically wrong. They raced through the palace's winding corridors, boots echoing on iridescent stone. When they reached the chamber, the sight stole Zyra's breath. The hearthstone stood in the center of the circular room, but its usual warm emerald radiance had been replaced by a dull, ashen gray. Worse, fine cracks spiderwebbed across its surface, leaking wisps of black vapor that curled like dying breaths. "This isn't decay," Torin said, eyes narrowed. "This is sabotage." Mela stepped forward, her small hand outstretched. "Let me try." Before Zyra could stop her, the girl placed her palm against the stone. Instantly, her amber eyes rolled back, and she collapsed. Lyric caught her just in time. "She's alive," he said, voice tight. "But she's not here." Vela pressed her fingers to Mela's temple and gasped. "Her mind. It's been pulled into the stone." Zyra's blood ran cold. There was only one ritual capable of trapping a consciousness within the hearthstone. The echo binding, an ancient, forbidden practice used only to imprison traitors during the blood schism. But that rite required royal blood and intimate knowledge of the palace's resonance network. Someone inside the spire had done this. While healers stabilized Mela's body, Zyra convened the High Council in secret. She named no suspects, but her eyes lingered on Elder Vornak, a stoic traditionalist who had openly opposed the twins' legitimacy. His loyalty had always been to purity, not progress. Meanwhile, Torin and Lyric scoured the palace's lower archives, searching for records of the echo binding. In a vault sealed with sonic locks, they found a dusty holoscroll detailing the ritual, and a chilling addendum. The only way to free a trapped soul was for a blood relative to enter the stone willingly, and survive the memories of every Xylosian who had ever lived. "It's a suicide mission," Torin muttered. Lyric, barely 13, squared his shoulders. "I'm going in." "No," Torin said firmly. "Not without me. You're not blood." "I'm their father," Torin replied, and that was that. That night, under the cover of a blizzard, the two entered the hearthstone chamber. Zyra stood watch, her heart pounding like a war drum. As Lyric and Torin placed their hands on the cold stone, the air shimmered, and they vanished. Inside the hearthstone, time had no meaning. Torin found himself adrift in a sea of memories. Births, Deaths, betrayals, triumphs. He saw Xylosian warriors riding crystalline dragons across asteroid fields, queens weeping over stillborn heirs, lovers entwined beneath dying stars. The weight of centuries pressed down on him like gravity made flesh. Lyric, however, moved with purpose. His hybrid nature, half-human adaptability, half-Xylosian resonance, allowed him to navigate the chaos. He followed a faint golden thread through the storm of memories. Mela's essence, faint but persistent. They found her in the memory of the first queen's coronation, trapped in a loop of endless ceremony. Her eyes lit up when she saw them. "You came," she whispered. "We're getting you out," Lyric said. But as they turned to leave, the memory twisted. The sky turned black. The crowd of spectral Xylosians turned toward them, their eyes hollow, their mouths open in silent screams. "The stone is poisoned," Torin realized. Someone didn't just trap her. They infected the hearthstone with a psychic parasite. Before they could react, shadowy tendrils erupted from the ground, wrapping around Torin's legs. He fought, but the memories sapped his strength. Lyric tried to help, but the parasite latched onto his fear, projecting visions of his father dying, his mother exiled, his sister lost forever. Just as despair threatened to swallow them, a voice echoed through the chaos. "Remember who you are." It was Mela, but not the child they knew. This Mela stood tall, her eyes blazing with ancestral fire. She reached into the parasite's core and pulled. Light exploded. Back in the chamber, all three tumbled out of the stone, gasping. The hearthstone flickered, then reignited, its emerald glow stronger than ever. The cracks sealed. The black vapor vanished. But the victory was short-lived. From the shadows of the chamber doorway, Elder Vornak stepped forward. Not alone, but flanked by a dozen guards bearing Kethie insignias carved into their armor. His face was grim. "I tried to warn you, Zyra," he said. "Hybrid blood weakens us. It invites corruption." The Kethie offered peace, if we handed over the abominations. Zyra's eyes narrowed. "You betrayed your own people." "I saved them," Vornak spat. "The Kethie have the null stone. In 3 days it will be activated at the celestial convergence, a moment when all Xylosian resonance peaks. It will silence our bloodline forever, unless we give them the twins." Torin stepped between the elder and his children, his human body unarmored but unafraid. "You won't touch them." Vornak smiled thinly. "You misunderstand, human. They're already marked." He snapped his fingers. Lyric and Mela cried out in unison, clutching their chests. Black veins began to spread beneath their skin, the same corruption that had infected the hearthstone. "The parasite wasn't just in the stone," Vornak said. "It was in the ritual, and now it's in them." Zyra's world shattered. She fell to her knees beside her grandchildren, her hands trembling as she touched their fevered brows. Vela sobbed, pressing her forehead to Lyric's. Torin turned to Vornak, eyes burning with human fury. "What do you want?" "The Kethie will arrive at dawn," Vornak said. "Surrender the children, and the spire lives. Defy them, and we all burn." He left, locking the chamber behind him. For hours they searched for a cure. Zyra scoured forbidden texts. Vela sang healing harmonics passed down through generations. Torin mixed human antitoxins with Xylosian moss extracts, hoping against hope. Nothing worked. The parasite grew stronger, feeding on the twins' resonance. As the first light of dawn painted the snow in rose and gold, Mela opened her eyes. "It's not a parasite," she whispered. Everyone froze. "It's a seed," Lyric added, his voice weak but clear. "The Kethie didn't want to kill us. They wanted to control us." Zyra's mind raced. The null stone didn't destroy resonance. It hijacked it, turning its wielders into puppets. If the twins were infected before the convergence, their power would amplify the null stone's reach, enslaving every Xylosian on the planet. But Mela was smiling faintly. "They don't know what they've done," she said. "Human DNA, it doesn't obey Xylosian rules. Our cells are fighting back. The parasite can't take root. It's mutating." Torin's eyes widened. "Mutating how?" Lyric sat up, the black veins now shimmering with gold. "It's becoming something new, something ours." At that moment the palace alarms blared. The Kethie had arrived. Hundreds of their obsidian ships hovered over the spire, their hulls bristling with null stone emitters. On the central vessel, a massive crystal pulsed with violet-black energy, the very heart of their weapon. Zyra made her choice. Get them to the apex spire, she commanded. The highest point. If the convergence is going to happen, it will happen there. As guards loyal to Zyra held off Vornak's traitors, the family fled upward through secret passages known only to royalty. The apex spire was an open platform where the twin suns aligned once every century. Tomorrow. But the Kethie had accelerated their plan. The celestial energies were already building. Outside, the sky churned with unnatural storms. The Kethie commander, arm healed, armor reforged, stood on the lead ship, his voice booming through amplifiers. Surrender the hybrids, Queen Zyra, or watch your world fall into eternal silence. Zyra stepped to the edge of the platform, wind whipping her white hair. You think silence is power? She called back. You've never heard a human laugh. You've never felt a mother's lullaby. You've never known love that crosses species. She turned to her family. Torin, hold them. He gathered Lyric and Mela in his arms as they began to glow. Not with the usual emerald, but with a swirling mix of gold, green, and blue. The Kethie activated the null stone. A wave of oppressive silence swept across the planet. Birds fell from the sky, crystals dimmed. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. But on the apex spire, the glow intensified. The twins' hybrid DNA, unpredictable, resilient, defiant, began to rewrite the parasite's code. Instead of silencing resonance, their bodies transformed it. The nullstone's energy reversed, surging back toward the Kethie fleet. The commander's eyes widened in horror as his own weapon turned against him. The violet crystal cracked, then exploded in a burst of harmless light. The Kethie ship sputtered and crashed into the snow below, their crews dazed but alive. Silence returned, but this time it was peaceful. In the aftermath, Vornak was imprisoned, his followers disbanded. The spire, though scarred, stood stronger than ever. The twins' mutation, now called the Harmony strain, spread slowly through the population not as a disease but as an evolution. Xylosians began dreaming in color they'd never seen, feeling emotions they'd long suppressed. The rigid lines between species, between tradition and change, began to blur. Zyra, once the guardian of purity, now presided over a renaissance. She declared a new era, the age of blended light. Torin, no longer just a soldier or a husband, became the first guardian of the Harmony, tasked with teaching both human and Xylosian children the value of difference. And on quiet nights, when the auroras danced above the mountains, the family would gather on the apex spire. Lyric would tinker with resonance shields. Mela would recite human poems in harmonic tongue. Vela would lean into Torin's shoulder, her white hair mingling with his dark curls. And Zyra would watch them, her heart full, her throne no longer a seat of power, but a place of belonging. Yet far beyond the stars, in the ruins of a shattered Kethie dreadnought, a single data core pulsed to life. A message, encoded in dead languages, transmitted into the void. They are not alone. The hybrids walk among us. Prepare the cradle. But that was a story for another time. Years flowed like meltwater down the slopes of the verdant spire, carving new paths through old stone. The scars of war, both external and within, never fully vanished, but they became part of the palace's story, like veins in crystal. The Harmony strain, once feared as contamination, blossomed into a quiet revolution. Xylosian children now laughed with human spontaneity, debated with human curiosity, and dreamed with human boldness. In return, human envoys, welcomed for the first time as equals, learned the Xylosian arts of stillness, resonance, and deep listening. The galaxy watched, bewildered, as the once isolationist Xylos dominion opened its crystalline gates to the universe, not as conquerors, but as kin. At the heart of it all stood the family who had defied fate. Lyric, now 20, had grown into a quiet force of invention. He designed the first hybrid resonance engine, a device that combined terrestrial mechanics with Xylosian bioenergy, allowing ships to travel not just through space, but through emotional frequencies. Pilots reported smoother flights, clearer thoughts, even shared dreams during long voyages. He worked alongside engineers from a dozen species, his workshop a symphony of clinking tools and humming energy cores. And whenever doubt crept in, whenever he feared he wasn't Xylosian enough or human enough, he'd remember his father's voice. You don't have to choose. You get to be both. Mela, ever the spark, became the Dominion's youngest ambassador. Her speeches, infused with human poetry and Xylosian harmonic resonance, moved hardened diplomats to tears. She traveled to human colonies, Xylosian outposts, and neutral worlds alike, teaching the language of empathy. She carried a small locket around her neck. Inside, a sliver of the original hearthstone and a chip of earth granite, pressed together like a promise. When asked what she was, she'd smile and say, "I'm what happens when two worlds decide to listen." Vela, once burdened by shame, now walked the palace halls with her head high, her white hair woven with threads of gold and copper, symbols of her dual legacy. She founded the Academy of Blended Light, where children of all species learn side by side. She taught them that strength wasn't in purity, but in fusion. That love wasn't weakness, but the bravest kind of power. And every evening, without fail, she returned to the northern estate. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. There, in the snow-draped cabin where it all began, she and Torin would sit by the fire, hands clasped, watching the auroras dance. Torin, gray now at the temples but still broad-shouldered and warm-eyed, had refused every formal title except one. Father. He trained young recruits, Xylosian, human, and everything in between, in the art of defense rooted in protection, not domination. He taught them to fight only when necessary, and to always leave room for peace. The soldiers called him Old Star, not out of mockery, but reverence. And when he walked through the palace gardens, children would run to him, not because he was royalty, but because he always had sweets in his pockets and stories in his voice. As for Zyra, queen no longer by her own decree, she lived in a quiet wing of the spire, surrounded by books, star maps, and the laughter of grandchildren yet to come. She had stepped down on the day of the first Harmony Festival, placing the crown not on her own head, but on Mela's. The crowd had roared, not in shock, but in joy. For the first time in Xylosian history, the throne was inherited not by bloodline alone, but by heart. But the true test of peace came not from war, but from wonder. One spring, as the ice rivers melted and the mountain blossoms unfurled in hues of violet and silver, a strange signal pulsed through the outer sectors. A gentle, rhythmic hum, unlike any known language. It carried no threat, only a question. "Are you ready?" Scans revealed a vessel of impossible design, hovering at the edge of Xylosian space. It bore no weapons, no insignia, only a symbol etched into its hull. Two circles intertwined, one green, one blue. Lyric and Mela, now co-regents of the Dominion, went to meet it alone. Inside, they found beings unlike any they'd encountered, tall, luminous, with skin like opal and eyes that held galaxies. They called themselves the Keepers of the Cradle. "We have watched," their leader said, voice like wind through ancient trees. "We seeded life on countless worlds, not to dominate, but to see what would grow when cultures met. The Kethie misunderstood our purpose. They sought control. But you chose connection. The Keepers offered no technology, no weapons, no treaties, only an invitation to join a galactic symphony of blended civilizations, each unique, each valued, all learning from one another." Mela turned to her brother. "What do we say?" Lyric smiled. "We say yes, but only if they promise to send someone who can teach us how to bake that fruit pie Torin's always talking about." Back on Xylos, the family gathered once more on the apex spire, not for battle, but for celebration. The Keeper's arrival marked the beginning of a new era, one where the Xylos Dominion would help guide other worlds through the messy, beautiful chaos of unity. As the twin suns dipped below the snow-capped peaks, painting the sky in rose and emerald, Zyra took Torin's hand. "You were right," she said softly. "Love is the bravest kind of power." He squeezed her fingers. "Nah, that was all you, your majesty." She laughed, a sound so rare and bright it made the crystals hum in response. Below them, the palace glowed with life. Children played in the courtyards, their laughter mixing human joy with Xylosian song. Vela walked arm in arm with a human diplomat, deep in conversation. Lyric tinkered with a new resonance shield while Mela recited a poem to a group of wide-eyed students. And high above, the Keeper's ship released 1,000 floating lanterns, each one carrying a seed from a different world. They drifted down like snowflakes, planting the future in the soil of the present. Years later, when historians would write of this time, they would not call it the Age of War or the Age of Silence. They would call it the Age of Blended Light, and they would tell the story of a barren princess, a human soldier, a stubborn queen, and two impossible children who taught the stars how to sing together. And in a quiet cabin on the mountain's edge, an old man and woman would sit by the fire, watching their great-grandchildren chase auroras across the snow. Green-skinned and brown-haired, white-haired and amber-eyed, All of them whole, all of them home.